Hey there, Jenna from the Intern Hustle here, and I'm back with another inspirational interview. I'm excited to introduce you to a recent college grad who is using her combined experience from school, sport, and internships to shape a personal brand and make a positive impact. Sarah Howard is a 2020 graduate of Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon. In college, Sarah was the definition of student athlete, as she was full-time and fully committed to both school and sport. A two-sport NCAA athlete in soccer and track and field, she also managed a busy academic schedule and made internships a priority. Sarah is passionate about telling stories through content creation and digital marketing, and she has done a beautiful job at communicating her own personal brand. She started the blog acollegegirl.com in 2017 to help young women navigate college and find success, using a combination of college tips and lifestyle inspiration. Most recently, Sarah launched the SelfMade Podcast to share the stories of small business owners and entrepreneurs and help them stand out amidst the crazy climate of COVID-19. In this interview, I chat with Sarah about how she's done all of it while keeping a clear and consistent brand throughout. Check the description below this video for links to the SelfMade Podcast, acollegegirl.com, and other ways that you can stay in the loop on what Sarah's up to. And be sure to subscribe to the SelfMade Podcast to listen and learn from a diverse group of entrepreneurs, especially a future episode where I chat with Sarah about the intern hustle, my experience as an entrepreneur, and my advice for you if you're writing a resume or looking for an internship. Hit that like button if you're excited for this interview with Sarah, and don't forget to subscribe for new videos every single week on this channel. Sarah and I would love to hear from you in the comments. Be sure to let us know what your biggest takeaways are after watching this interview. Hey there, I'm Jenna Ryan from the internhustle.com, and this is Initiative Muscle Monday, helping you to start each week with an intentional step toward a successful future. Let's do this. Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining me today and chatting with me.
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me on your YouTube video today.
Yes. So I know that you are a recent graduate of Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon. And I need to ask you, actually, is it Oregon or Oregon? Like, how do you actually pronounce it? Because I feel like I do it differently every time I say it.
Oregon.
Oregon.
Yeah. And
Okay.
Lewis and Clark is like 5 miles from downtown.
Oh, awesome. Okay. So you're a recent graduate. Congratulations. Can you tell me just, first of all, how you decided to choose Lewis and Clark as the college you attended, and then also what you studied while you were there?
Yes. So I chose Lewis and Clark because, backtrack, my family and I, we grew up in California, and we would always visit Oregon and Washington as family vacations growing up. And I was like, I love Oregon. I love the city of Portland, everything about it. I knew that's where I wanted to go to school. So I only applied to schools in Oregon and a few in Washington. And I'm a two-sport athlete, so I played soccer and ran track, and that was a big deciding factor. I knew I wanted to be an athlete in college, and Lewis and Clark was a really good fit, both academically and for the athletics program, and being able to play on both teams was a really big deciding factor for going to Lewis and Clark. And I studied rhetoric and media studies, which is kind of like the elevated communications major, just calling it rhetoric instead of communications. So I majored in that, and then I minored in art and art history.
That's great. So you did mention you were a two-sport NCAA athlete, which is super impressive. First of all, just doing soccer and track in college. What would you say college athletics taught you? What lessons did collegiate athletics teach you that you can take forward?
Collegiate athletics was so valuable to me, and there's definitely a ton of lessons that I learned, so it's hard to narrow it down to one or two, but I think some of the big ones was it really taught me how to face adversity head on and working with a team, which is so important for life after college and in the workforce. And for example, our soccer team freshman sophomore year wasn't maybe the strongest we could have been, but by senior year we were like, we need to work together as a team to get the results we want. And this past year was the best season in Lewis and Clark women's soccer history ever,
That's great.
in terms of wins and rankings. So that was really valuable to learn, like, this is what we need to do. We've done it, and now we get the results. And I think having that power to do so is a really important lesson for all of us. And then just never giving up. I hate to say, I'm kind of a klutz. I've had some like pretty bad injuries in college that could have really set me back and caused me to completely end the career. But having that mental toughness, both physically, mentally, and being able to say like, I'm going to compete and keep going and not give up was super powerful. And I think those lessons will carry with me long after college. I mean, I've been graduated for like 2 weeks now, so
Yeah, still fresh.
keeping those strong.
Yeah, no, I think it's
Yes.
great. And another thing, collegiate athletics has taught me is just leadership. And I'm sure, I mean, being in two different sports as well, you have a lot of different personalities and, people management and just learning how to work together and lead your teammates in different ways as well. Probably something that will be very valuable for you as you move forward throughout your career, just having that experience and, how to operate with different personalities and be a leader.
Definitely. Yeah.
It's great.
Different coaches, like different bosses, different coaches, different styles and everything.
Yes. And one of the things I always like to say actually is managing up, like when you're going forward in your professional career, learning how to manage up and, not boss your boss around necessarily, but, be able to push back on things and lead from that standpoint is also super important. So I like that you mentioned that about working with a coach and being able to manage to them and lead them as well, because it's definitely applicable as you move forward in your career. So that's great. And with collegiate athletics and school, I know you had your major and a minor as well. How did you manage your time? Like, that's a lot to juggle, two sports.
Yeah.
And did you have specific time management tools or life hacks in general that you use to manage all of those things?
Yeah, kind of. My friends and I joke that I'm a Virgo, which is why I can balance so many things. That's like, oh, there you go. When's your birthday?
August 25th.
Okay, mine's in September.
Okay.
But so yeah, maybe being a Virgo, but also time management tools are super valuable, and you have to find the planner that works for you. I know the one that I have, someone else might hate and don't want to use, but for me, it was having a planner where I could do hour by hour time tracking, and because I was running from like a classroom to the gym to downtown in a day, so it was a lot of getting from point A to point B. So having that hour by hour was really valuable. But then also I like live off to-do lists. But instead of just writing one long to-do list that's kind of overwhelming, you're like, how can I tackle this? I would split it into subjects. So I'd have each class and then work and then sports as categories. And so let's say I'm in a rhetoric class, I have 3 things to do. That's much easier to see and approach than to be like, I have 20 things on my to-do list. It's much easier to like break it into those different segments.
I like that.
So that was super valuable.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. It's similar to what I do with my calendar. I think I have in my Google Calendar, I color code everything. So that's the way I break it out and, keep personal life from work life and all sorts of things that I have going on. So I like that system of breaking it down into something that's manageable.
Yeah, it makes it much more manageable, even if it's like color coding or just subjects, anything to just make it from one big list into multiple ones makes it a lot easier to assess.
That's great. And I know, one of the things that impresses me the most is that not only were you a 2-sport athlete, but you also managed to do internships while you were in college. And one of the things I honestly get pushback on from a lot of student athletes is that they don't have time. And I get it. It's busy being a college athlete. You have practice, you have games, you have all of the things, study tables, weightlifting sessions, all of it. But I believe, because I put in over 40 hours a week, doing cheerleading in college, that it's possible to get internships as well and to make it work. And it's just about how bad do you want it and being willing to grind it out a little bit, which is part of the hustle, if you will. So can you tell me a little bit about your internships that you had in college and how you got those internships? And then maybe, what's an unexpected skill that you learned from an internship that you had?
Yeah, definitely. So in college, I interned for NBC Sports, and they had an office in Portland. So it was very convenient to commute from campus to town. And I think it was having the career center on campus was a very big help at the get-go with starting the internship, having them look over the resume, look over my cover letter, make sure I really tailored it specifically to what NBC Sports wanted was super valuable just to get that first interview and then get your foot in the door. And I know that's something that you do at the Intern Hustle, making sure those resumes are really specific to the job's needs.
Yep.
So that helped with the first internship. And I was there for 2 terms. I was supposed to be there just for the spring, but I extended it into the office extended it into the summer. So I was there for 2 internships and then again my senior year in the spring. So I've had a bit of time in that field, which was great. And I was in the marketing department.
Okay.
And then an unexpected skill, I had this like vision, I guess, my first time around of what the internship would be like. I was like, I'll do social media and, writing content and copy for the department. But I ended up analyzing just a ton of data. And it was a lot of just like sitting down with like big, scary spreadsheets and extracting the necessary information and then giving it to the department in a tangible way. I think that was a really unexpected skill that I ended up really enjoying, and I think data analytics is pretty cool, even though it's kind of nerdy.
Yeah, that's
so yeah,
great.
I think that was a big unexpected skill that I gained from my time there.
That's great. And I think a lot of times when people think marketing, just like you said, you go into it thinking more of the creative content marketing side of things, but the analytical side of marketing is a whole, beast in and of itself. And I know at the tech startup I worked at in San Francisco, we had a whole team that was just the analytical side of marketing. And
Yes.
They were masters at their craft. And it's a very fascinating thing. So I'm glad you got exposure to that as well, and just learning something that you didn't really expect to, which is great. And
Yeah,
you mentioned that, and sorry, I reacted earlier because I don't know if you can hear it, but the thunderstorm that's going on in New Orleans right now is intense. So when you were talking earlier and I made a face, it wasn't about you. It was about the crazy thunder that was going on. So anyways, but you mentioned that you had the internship with NBC Sports and that got extended the first time, which was great. Mm-hmm. And then you also interned with them again. So the first time was in 2018, I believe. And then the second time was in 2020. So did that come about in any certain way, the repeat internship? And then I guess in addition to that, I'd love to know if you have any advice for students who are looking to maintain those long-term professional relationships. Because I think that's such an important part of an internship, is building those relationships. And you obviously did a great job to be able to get invited back for a second term with them. So would love to just hear your advice on that.
Yeah, of course. So landing a repeat internship was quite interesting because, without getting into too much specifics, the entire department switched all of the employees for the marketing team. So there was no one that I actually knew. But I think what helped was during my first internship, I connected a lot with people in different departments that were still working in the office. So even though the marketing manager the second time around didn't know me personally, she could talk to someone in sales or on the content social media side, and they knew who I was, and that was super beneficial. So I think my advice is to check in periodically with the people that you did work with, but also make sure it's people outside of the one department that you were a part of, because you never know what's going to happen to the people that you were working closest with. I think that really helped. And then I had a pretty good relationship with the people that were in my age range in the entry-level positions out of college, and they were super open to providing advice and checking in, versus it can be kind of scary to email a VP or the head of a department. It's easier to reach out to someone that you can kind of relate to on an age and employment range.
That's great advice. And I always tell students as well, I think one of the things, the people, like you mentioned, kind of moved different departments within the company, but there's also cases where they go on to different companies and they could be a resource for you in that way as well, and help open doors for you, further in your career at a different company. So I think the way that you said, keeping in touch with them and maintaining those relationships is super key. And that was big thunder. I want to talk to you a little bit too about, what did you, coming out of those internships?
Heard that, yeah.
Did you hear that? Yeah.
Yeah, that
So
was loud.
yeah, it's nuts. So coming out of your internships, you know, are there things that you learned you didn't really like, and did it make you change kind of direction at all in terms of what you think you want to do for your career? Are there things that you learned you didn't like versus things that maybe you were really surprised by that you didn't think you would like at all?
hmm So I actually really enjoyed my internship. I know some people go into it and they're like, this isn't for me, this isn't my path. But for me, it really solidified that I enjoy marketing, especially the sports side of things. And I think
Yeah.
having the experience as an athlete was super beneficial to that. But on the flip side, when during my first internship, NBC changed their tagline and they kind of rebranded their company's message and approach to its audience and consumer market. And for me, I became super interested in branding and how companies create their consistent brand and telling that story. And that's something that I would like to pursue now that I've graduated college, and helping companies with their branding and creating that consistency across the board. I found super fascinating. And that was something that was really unexpected because, I don't go into the internship saying, we're going to change the whole messaging, change all these things. That was,
Yeah.
it kind of sprung upon us.
That's amazing that you bring that up, because one of the things when I discovered you, and you and I crossed paths on an online professional network, Girl Boss Community, which is for female, entrepreneurs and just anyone really who's in the workforce. And one of the things I loved about you when I stumbled upon you was for being a recent graduate. I mean, like you said, you just graduated 2 weeks ago. You do such a nice job with your own personal brand, and it is so clear and consistent across platforms. And everything from your LinkedIn profile to the website that you've created that has a portfolio of your work and your resume, and your podcast, which we'll talk about in a second, and all of those things. You've just done such a nice job with your personal brand. So I want to give you kudos for that, because I've seen a lot of college students who struggle with that, especially with the LinkedIn part. A lot of them don't feel that they need to be on LinkedIn. They don't see the value in it. It's not the sexy social media platform like some of the others out there. So I think
I say LinkedIn is my favorite social media. I
good.
love LinkedIn.
That's great to hear. Yeah. And more students need to get on board with that. And I think you're just such a great example of how to utilize it. So with that, what advice do you have for a student who's looking to really establish, kind of nail down their personal brand, I guess? Like, how did you get comfortable with how you put your stuff out there, and how to keep it both clear and consistent across platforms?
Yeah, so for me, in addition to the jobs and the sports, I also had a blog throughout college called acollegegirl.com. It's still around. I want to update it still, but I have like other endeavors. But having a blog like that, where I kind of like was toning my voice and writing content consistently, that really helps kind of nail my brand. And that was kind of the start of creating how I like show myself online.
Yep.
But for other students who maybe a blog or using social media in that way isn't exactly for them, which is like totally fine. I think asking your friends to describe you is super valuable. Sometimes it's hard to like pitch yourself because you feel like you're showing off or something, which isn't true, but it can be kind of a weird feeling to be like, I'm good at this and this is why. But having friends and family members do that is kind of an easy way to get into it. And then also for getting your brand online, I think looking at the companies you're interested in and looking at what the employees do in their personal like life outside the company is super beneficial. For example, Nike is in Portland, and if you love Nike, it has a huge employee base, and there's someone in the shoe market that you're interested in and you want to design shoes. Look at and see what they do. Do they talk about their Nikes on Instagram, or do they have a shoe blog or a YouTube channel? Are they doing these different things that you're like, oh, I could do this and put my own spin on it? And that's a really good way to establish your brand and kind of show yourself to employers.
That's great advice. And I love what you said about asking other people to describe you and what you're good at, what your strengths are. That's actually one of the exercises I have students go through is, I call it superpowers, and asking people what your superpowers are. What do they think you're unique for and good at? And it's one of the better ways to learn, because it's so hard to think that way about yourself sometimes and want to put that out there. So that's great advice. And I love what you said too about researching the companies and figuring out what employees do just in their day-to-day human life, because we're all human. Yeah. So getting to, be able to be on their level a little bit with that is great advice. And I know that one of the things you've done most recently with your own efforts and your personal brand is launching a podcast. You've launched a podcast called the SelfMade Podcast. Can you tell me a little bit more about what it was like, your idea to launch that podcast and what your mission is for it?
Yeah, so the podcast is a recent endeavor. I started about 2 months ago when coming back to California in light of the pandemic. And I was talking to someone and they were like, "You'd be really good at a podcast." And I was like, "Okay, maybe that'd be really cool." It's something like, I love listening to podcasts. I listen to them all the time.
Me too.
But I was like, what would I do? What would I do? And then it kind of just hit me. I was reading about how small businesses have been impacted by COVID-19, and a lot of them have been forced to pivot or close their business indefinitely. And I was like, what can I do as a college student to raise awareness about these companies? Because I couldn't necessarily buy all the products and support in a financial manner, but I do have a platform and I can use my voice. So I decided to make the SelfMade Podcast, where I interview small business owners and entrepreneurs, and you're going to be a guest in an upcoming episode, which is really exciting. And it's been a really good time. It's been 2 months and I've had consistent episodes every week, and people have been really positive and open to interviewing, which is really exciting. And yeah, so that's the SelfMade Podcast. It's episodes every Tuesday, and it's on all the podcasting platforms.
That's great. And I will link to all of that in the description for this video as well, so people can look it up and find it. I've listened to a handful of the episodes, and it's great. I think it's awesome what you're doing. And it's so interesting to hear entrepreneurs' stories from when they're just starting out and what their challenges have been and how they've learned to pivot. So it's very interesting, even if you don't want to be an entrepreneur, just to honestly learn about other industries and what people are working on as you think about your own professional career as a student. I think it's a fascinating take.
Exactly. Yeah. I've learned more from people in industries that maybe I don't see myself in, but they provide super tangible advice that anybody can use, which is really, really cool. And often, like the podcasts that I listen to, they tend to interview kind of like the corporate giants and the people at like the very top of their game, which is super interesting, but it feels far away sometimes. And you're like, how can I get there? And talking to people who are starting off is really useful. And it's great to see their stories as well.
Well, and you're giving them a platform. So that's great. And like you said, you're going to be having me on as well. And I very much appreciate having the platform to get to share more about the intern hustle. So thank you for that. And what would you say, launching a podcast, that's a whole new thing that you just jumped into. What's been your biggest challenge with launching that?
The biggest challenge, I think, is just getting comfortable with the interviewing style and really going like deep into researching each person and making them unique. You don't want to make each episode too similar. I mean, I like to ask some similar questions, such as like their journey and career advice, because I think it's useful to see that across the board. But in terms of the bulk of the interview, really tailoring it to be unique for the guest, I think it's a fun challenge, because I like doing the research and kind of diving into their lives a bit more online. So I think that would be one of the biggest challenges, but also a really good learning opportunity as well.
That's great. And I can relate. I do the same thing when I have people on here that I'm interviewing. It is, you have to dive in and make sure that you're getting enough good content out of it to make it insightful for everyone listening. So great job with that. And I want to ask, in addition to growing the podcast, what's next for you? What are you hoping to, pursue in the future now that you've just graduated college? What are the opportunities that you're most interested in looking to pursue?
Okay, so with the podcast, it's a really great side project, and I want to continue it as long as I can, and hopefully, fingers crossed, I get a job, I can still do it as like a part-time thing, because I think it's really fun and I want to keep sharing these stories. In terms of opportunities, I am applying to jobs, kind of navigating the job market right now. I'm really interested in marketing and branding. Those are two things I'm really passionate about, but also social media. it's not really applicable right now given the state of the world, but I love like event marketing and creating those like activations for the consumer. And that's something down the line I would like to kind of dive in more thoroughly and deeper. Just right now it's a little difficult, but digital marketing is so important, especially in this time, and creating that consumer connection. So job applications, kind of the typical.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm in California, but I would love to go back to Portland
Okay.
and spend more time in that city.
That's great. Put those vibes out in the world for you. And I know the event space now, I mean, so many people are starting to try to figure out what virtual events look like and dabble in that. So there could be some really cool opportunities for you to get involved on the ground level with, how companies figure out their virtual event strategy and positioning yourself to maybe become a go-to person for that if it's something that you'd be interested in. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to be had. I know it's a tough time for everybody, and a lot of people are trying to navigate, what this looks like, especially recent grads, first time stepping into the job market. But if I could give you any advice, I think you've done a great job positioning yourself. You've, obviously gotten the internship experience. You've got the experience from being a, collegiate athlete, which we've talked about goes a long way professionally. And, you're doing all the right things with your personal brand and putting yourself out there with the podcast. And so I think you have a bright future ahead, and I'm excited to see where you go.
Thank you.
Yeah. So
thank you. I really appreciate it.
A few questions that I just like to wrap up with people. Now that you've wrapped up college, if you could go back and give yourself as a college freshman a piece of advice, what would it be?
Yeah, I think a piece of advice I would give myself is don't be afraid to try something new, even if like maybe your friend group isn't doing it, whether it's a new club or an outside of the classroom activity, just go for it. I think that's a really big piece of advice because there's so many opportunities in college you have to really kind of take advantage of. And your friends, true friends will support you, whatever the endeavor is, and maybe they'll join you as well. So don't be afraid to try something new.
That's great advice, and something that I think we all can continue to use going forward too. People get scared to step outside of their comfort zone, but it's what really makes you grow. So good advice.
Definitely.
And what is a favorite memory from your college experience?
Oh, there's so many. It's hard to choose. I think one of my favorite experiences where I grew the most was actually very far away from campus. I studied abroad, and I studied abroad in Australia for a semester. And I think that experience was super beneficial, and I learned a lot about myself and the country and everything, but I really grew as a person during that time. So I'd highly recommend anyone in college take advantage of the opportunity to study and live in a new country.
I can only imagine how cool that would be. And Australia is still on my list. So if I go, I'm going to have to get some recommendations from you for sure.
I've got plenty. I love Australia. It's a great place.
How long were you there for?
I was there for about 5 months.
Cool.
Yeah. And then I did some traveling afterwards, but in school in Australia, we were in Sydney and Brisbane. And then we did different excursions for like a month and a half.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Final question. And I like to ask everyone this. It's a big part of my brand is what's your party trick? So party trick is LLC. It's actually my LLC name because I believe so much in a party trick. And really when I say party trick, I mean like how do you stand out in this world, both personally and professionally? What's something that people recognize you for that makes you unique? And I guess I'll leave it at that. What would you say is your party trick?
My party trick. So something, I think creating content, maybe that's not like the biggest party trick, but I think I make content on a lot of different platforms, whether it was blogging while in college or the podcast now, to creating content for different companies. I think that'd be my party trick. I think I'm not to like, I feel like I'm pretty good. I can
That's good.
think of these like
you should own
contents.
that.
Yeah. So I think that would be my party trick. Less professionally, I love TikTok and all the TikTok dances. So that's awesome. That's my endeavor.
That's awesome. I mean, one of the reasons I love this question so much is it's because it's a great icebreaker to get to know people. I actually printed business cards. This was right before I launched the Intern Hustle. So it was just like a personal business card that I could hand out at conferences and things that didn't even have my business information on it. but one side of it was a picture of me about to do a one-arm push-up, and it said, "What's your party trick?" And then the back side had my information and me actually doing the one-arm push-up. So it was just a fun conversation starter when I would go to, different networking events or conferences. I'd hand them that and I'd make them answer the question, "What's your party trick?" And you learn fun things. You learn what people are really, strong at professionally, but you also learn some of the fun side, like TikTok. So
that's so cool.
I appreciate that.
I love that.
Yeah. So
that's a very memorable way to do it as well with the business card. I think that's a really good idea.
It definitely got a lot of attention the first time I ever did it. People were loving it, and it was just a really cool way to get to know people. And I would, take a note in my phone or on the back side of their business card when they would hand me theirs, and write down what their party trick was. So it was a fun way for me to get to connect and stay in touch with them going forward as well. So maintain that relationship. Well,
super cool.
Sarah, thank you so much. It was a pleasure speaking with you. And where can people find more about the SelfMade podcast, or maybe, what else you're up to if you're open to sharing that? I know you mentioned the blog is something that you have and are, going to revamp at some point probably. So where, if people are interested in learning more about what you're working on, can they find you?
Yes. So the SelfMade podcast is on all platforms like Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts, and it's on Instagram at SelfMade Pod. I post content daily about career and business advice as well as the guests. So that's a really good resource to check out. The blog is acollegegirl.com. There is a lot of really tangible blog posts about college and college advice. So that's a great place to check it out. And if not, I mean, my name is Sarah Howard. There's a lot of Sarah Howards on LinkedIn, but
if they search Sarah Howard, and
please add me.
yeah, Lewis and Clark College,
Portland,
Sarah Howard.
It should come up. Yes. But that's where you can find me.
That's great. Well, I will be sure to link to all of that in the description of this video as well. So encourage people to check that out. But Sarah, thank you again for chatting with me today. It was great.
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.